There's a problem in the windshield wiper linkage, and we can really see that whenever I push on the windshield wiper. This whole bolt right here is moving back and forth, and what this is doing is it's not allowing the whole windshield wiper blade to be applying pressure on the windshield. So actually right where you sit and where the driver looks out of the windshield, it doesn't wipe that area. So it's pretty rough when you're driving. Remove the top of the computer cover, but we won't need to remove the computer. We'll be able to kind of wiggle it out without having to move the computer itself. 16mm nut is what's holding on the blades. These can be pretty tricky to get off because there's spring tension on them, so you need to push down on the pivot joint and then just lift the whole thing up, relieving the pressure from the threads. You can see just how much that stud moves around. Pry off that bolt cap with a screwdriver. When you put these blades back on, the one with this long curve is the one that goes all the way to the right on the driver's side, and the one with this shorter curve, that goes on the left on the passenger side. This piece of plastic trim just pulls off and there aren't any screws. Just work the whole thing. Now we're really starting to be able to see the linkage. Right there you can see the break in the linkage. On rockauto.com I found a wiper linkage, which is the entire linkage with everything that would hook up to the wiper arms and the other links that hook everything together, for about $35, and that's a great price. Considering that also some of the other pieces, like if you just wanted to get the arm, the one piece that's broken, that's about $33, so it's about the same price to get the entire linkage. And Rock Auto normally has great prices on a lot of their auto parts. Once the plastic cover is off of the computer, you have 3 bolts. You have one right here, one down here, and one over there, and that's what's holding the linkage in. Now comes the hard part of getting it out, and this is a really tight fit, but it is possible to get it out without having to remove the computer. You really just have to keep jiggling this mechanism around, and you really want to be careful of the edge of the windshield right here. This is probably the easiest time to crack it. You have a bit of a rubber buffer right here, but right where the edge of the glass is, that's the most fragile part of it. So if you were to hit that with the metal, you'd probably shatter the entire windshield. At some point, you'll kind of twist it, turn it up, and you'll finally get the mechanism out. This plug is real easy. There's just a tab right there that you pull up on, pull the whole plug out, and then it's free. Right here is the part that broke. The parts have come in from Rock Auto, and we've got the brand new linkage right here. It feels really smooth. We need to switch out the motor and put the new one on here because this is still a good motor, it still runs fine. So we just need to remove this bracket right here, and that's gonna clamp right back onto this. Remove the 2 T30 bolts right here. The third bolt's right there, and you might need to move the linkage a bit to get to it. This bolt right here on the linkage that connects it to the motor, we're gonna need to remove, and an impact makes this a lot easier. Loosely reinstall the nut just so we can tap this motor out. So I'll grab it by the linkage. And there we go, that just broke it free. Now everything's gonna come apart. Looks like this motor mounts with 3 points that are dents, basically, into the steel pipe. So whenever this comes off, you can see there's the dents that I want to rematch with these right there. That's great, that fits. It's always nice when it fits together. Reinstall that bracket. Re-put on the linkage onto the motor. Put the nut on. Whenever you disassemble the linkage, you can make marks on here and then transfer the marks whenever you reattach it to the motor. That can be pretty tricky. Sometimes your marks won't line perfectly up and your windshield wipers might be a little bit out of sync. The way that I like to use is if you simulate the motion of the wipers, you see both of them move. So once it gets over to this end, it's almost like watching for top dead center on a cylinder. You watch this until it stops moving, and then it'll start moving again. And that happens whenever everything is lined up at the very edge of the circle. So I'm watching them move, they're moving, and then right there, when this is a straight line, all this linkage is a straight line, that's when everything stops. So right there is where I know it's lined up, and that's where I'm gonna tighten it. It's really easy to mix this up where you might put it over on this side where it stops, so you just need to think about the direction of the motor and which way it'll be spinning, and then picture the windshield wipers on there with this in its position and which way the windshield wipers are going to be moving. We'll snug up this bolt. It's alright that things move now because it started to grab on to the knurling. Before we try and sneak this whole mechanism in underneath here, which is pretty tricky, it takes a lot of time, I'm going to plug this in. What we'll do is we'll just double check that this is going to be spinning in this direction, and we'll look at these two pieces where the windshield wipers mount to and make sure they spin up and down in sync with this, just to make sure everything's going the right direction, because if we have this 180 off, then it's going to go the wrong way. Whenever I turn this on, it does move a little bit to one direction, just a little bit, and then the other way as it goes around. So we might need to adjust the timing a little bit. I need to loosen this bolt and straighten things out a little bit, so I just need to bring this bracket, spin it over this way a little bit. I put it back in that straight line, so as soon as this starts moving, it goes in one direction. Let's get everything plugged in. This spins the wrong direction, which means I have it 180 degrees off. So whenever I move that, it wants to move the windshield wipers down instead of up. So I just need to re-loosen that bolt and spin it around to the other side. If you want to have this linkage lined up every time, you have to understand that every wiper motor, or most wiper motors, have a home position. So you turn it on, it'll cycle and stop in the same place, always. Even if you unplug it, you move the motor a little bit, and I plug it back in, it'll stop in the same place that it did last time before I unplugged it. And that's important because if you are trying to get this linkage out of the car, which in our case is pretty tricky, and it's going to be a bear to get out, so you might need to move this linkage a little bit just to get it out while it's unplugged. You bring the whole linkage out, and whenever you put the new linkage in, like whenever I did, you line it up in a straight line where that's at top dead center, but the motor is not in its home position whenever you line it up. So that's important because the next time you turn it on, it'll go back to its same home position that it was before, which is probably up here now because you moved it to get it out. So if you're going to line this up, you just take the motor, plug it back into the car, cycle it so it starts in its home position, then line it up from there. I need to move the motor separately from the linkage. So once I break that loose, I'm going to take the motor, spin this around to the position that I needed over here, the 180, but the motor, again, is not in its home position right now. So I'm just going to take it over to the car, plug it in, home it, and then we'll bolt it together. Plug in the motor, separate from the linkage. I'll cycle the motor twice. Now we'll connect the linkage. Now we'll bring this linkage in place, set it down, make sure that's a straight line, because we know that that straight line means that these are in the middle of both directions. I'll get the nut started on the outside. I'll bring this back over, line up the straight line, and then tighten it. And that's the right direction. So this is going to bring the wipers right up and then right back down. That's exactly what we're looking for. Now comes the really not so fun part of trying to get this back into its compartment. And you really have to be careful of the windshield edge right there. Always be aware of that and really don't hit any of the metal surfaces on that. It's the most fragile part of the glass. You'll have to move the linkage around a little bit to get it in the position that'll fit. Starting to get this to slip in. Just, of course, be careful of the metal pieces over here by the windshield. Kind of keep moving the linkage. I have to move this one down a little bit to fit it under, so I moved it a little bit that way. I feel like I'm really close right now, it just isn't quite slipping in. And once you get that in there, it's a lot more free to move around and put it where you need it. I waited to plug this in just so I have a little bit more room and that won't be restricting the amount of movement I have. We'll put the linkage bolts back in. That whole linkage runs real smooth. Start reinstalling all the old trim. Make sure you watch the handle here whenever you're screwing these in. If you hit the edge of the windshield, it's just gonna shatter the whole thing. Snap the trim in place. We'll need to work that around the hood hinge a little bit. We'll reinstall the windshield wipers, put the bolts on, and tighten up that bolt. And everything's working just as it should.